Okay, thanks a lot. Great for even trying to end with a positive idea, because after so many inequalities, not just in income levels, but also climate issues, vulnerabilities, not only on a global level, but also in between European countries, you may have a feeling how difficult it might be to come up with progressive policies. We would now almost directly open the floor to a debate, but maybe you directly want to comment on what others said, or can we directly open it? We can directly open it, perfect. So maybe we start with questions of clarification. Is there anything that's, yes? There should be a microphone coming. Oh, it's not yet. Okay. So then maybe until it's there, just let me add, there's just been a conference on geoeconomics, and Adam Posen from the Peterson Institute just said, you know, Europe is anyway in a bad position. They have no chance to invest as much as, to do as much as China and the US is doing in industrial policy. And definitely, even if you're all other countries just have the option, or if you cannot lead, follow, or leave it, accept that the world is unfair and unequal. So he rather said our best chance is to somehow adjust to it. But we have a first question of clarification.
Yeah, not really to clarify, but I would like to hear more from our first presenter, Dr. Hansjörg Herr.
Maybe you can just also briefly introduce yourself.
Oh yes, my name is Ezekiel Wamalwa from HTW, Berlin, studying Masters of International Development Economics. Quite impressed with your presentation, sir, and radically thinking about it. I wanted to know, do you think we'd arrive at the same conclusion of going slow on globalization if we looked at alternative measures of maybe measuring development? I look at an example of, let's say, a country like Mauritius. In the happiness index in Africa, it's probably the first. But in terms of GDP, we rank it around number 15. So if we look at this in terms of the quality of life and how globalization has helped other countries not really catch up economically, but in other ways of development, would we still arrive at the same conclusion? Thank you.
Okay, we would collect questions, and then, yes, in the front row, then Barbara.
Thank you very much, Mario Holzner, Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. I would also like to comment maybe on the convergence issue and actually question whether there really is no convergence among economies of this world. I think it very much depends which period you look at. So from 1960 to 2000, I think we don't see any convergence, but basically the last 2 decades or so, there actually is a convergence that is measurable. It's not only China, it's not only India, although these are obviously very important countries, but it's also, for instance, Central East and Southeast Europe. It's a lot of countries in Africa that had a very robust growth rates. So taking this maybe together also with some of the observations that Anamaria just showed us, and this is now pure speculation, but it might be that in the future we see actually a very different set of countries that might advocate free trade compared to those that did it, for instance, in the 1980s. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Barbara?
Thanks for the great panel. I have a common question.
I think you need to introduce yourself.
Barbara Fritz, the younger ones know me, FU Berlin. I just gave the lecture in the afternoon. Okay, Svenja, quite interesting research. I never thought about this, how inequality could be linked to natural resources consumption. I think there's one case, one specific issue which might link high inequality with high fossil consumption, which are energy subsidies. I just know the data for Latin America. In Latin America, in the medium level, there is subsidies for fossils, both for firms and consumers, of 4.7% of GDP. This is huge. And it's so difficult to get rid of these subsidies because, of course, richer people do profit from them. They have higher influence, but poor people profit from them also because it would be increasing poverty if you take off these subsidies. So there might be an issue. For the other, I'm not sure if it's really about inequality, because my suspicion is that changes in income level of certain groups, independently if it comes from income from other groups, so it's not an issue of inequality, but of reduction of relative poverty, increases the share of people which have this kind of consumption pattern, which is the global middle class, which is very energy intensive. Buying a car, buying a computer, air conditioner, etc. So it seems to have to be probably a consumption pattern issue, not a distribution issue. I would like to know about that. And then I have detailed questions we talk about bilaterally.
I think we have a last question here on the floor. And I'm sorry, I cannot really see you.
Giovanni Doldi. The first comment is following up Barbara. That is, I mean, I'm very wary of estimates of, say, the impact of inequality on emission, holding everything constant and assuming that all countries are the same, all consumption patterns are the same. In fact, I mean, it's a typical economy style. I mean, is the night in which every cow is black, like to paraphrase Hegel. But in fact, I mean, if you decrease inequality, but at the same time you introduce public transport, you certainly don't increase emission. It depends on consumption pattern, essentially. But the major comment was on the European European challenges and European policies. I think we are here to talk about the challenges for progressive policies. The big challenge that we are facing is to stop the consequences of the Draghi report. The Draghi report is essentially an idea of militarization of Europe subordinated to the United States, following the American model without one piece. I mean, the American model is bad, but there is one piece that is not so bad, expansionary macro policy. No, we don't have to do that. If you read the instruction that Ursula gave to his future commissioner, that are instructions that not even a North Korean leader would give, there is the plan of militarization and weaponization even of trade. I think we should talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we directly go into the debate, as it seems no longer a clarification question. It's an urgent question of clarification. No?
I can wait for the second round if needed.
Yeah, none. So maybe we just take yours and then
briefly,
we make a round of answers.
I am Raul from HTW Berlin, studying the Master in International and Development Economics as well. I have one question regarding the globalization topic. We've seen in the last years that the main political pushback against globalization comes from the losers in the north, not from the poor people in the south that are not converging to this lifestyle. Maybe many of them don't even know that they are not converging. My question is, isn't that a problem, that anti-globalization discourse? Because we can risk to have a deglobalization that is against the interest of the poor countries. Maybe FDI, maybe all this type of investment we have received in the last years is not good enough to catch up, but more protectionism from the global north would be even worse for us in the developing world. Can be this deglobalization speech discourse a little bit dangerous? Thank you.
Okay, I would suggest that we start in the order of presentations because it was a lot to Hansjörg, and we later change it to backward order.
Okay, I start. So thank you for the questions, and I think I can take all three questions together more or less. First, you are right. When we look empirically between countries, we have a certain reduction of inequalities, of differences, if you like, yeah? And at the same time, we have a huge increase in inequality in many, many countries. So this is what the empirical fact is. And we have also a reduction of absolute poverty. I think when we go into more details, we can distinguish 3-4 groups of countries. And let's say to make it simple, you're right. One group of countries was able to catch up, China, India, some other countries. But interestingly, I think these countries did fight against market forces. They used market forces, but they were using heavy industrial policy. And I think that would be also the same argument. Without heavy, also vertical industrial policy, catching up is not possible, and China is a showcase, catching up with non-market instruments, with control of capital flows, with local content of FDI. And there is, in my opinion, a relatively big group where you don't have only minor catching up. Of course, we don't know what happened in the future, but the last 250 years of capitalism did not lead to catching up. And in my opinion, economic paradigms, economic thinking has produced strong arguments why the market will not lead to catching up, so that you need the government. But probably the world may change, and these countries are allowed to follow strong industrial policies. And this brings me to the last question. So following Roderick, for example, he would not say stop trade, but he would say switch to regulated trade. Industrial policy, don't ask why, don't ask how. So I think what would be needed, in my opinion, is a regulated trade. A regulated trade to give much more room for industrial policy, even for one-sided industrial policy for less developed countries, or in the ideal case, following Stiglitz, etc., to give knowledge patents for free to the global south. So I think the vision, maybe misunderstanding, the vision would not be autarkies. So the vision would be regulated trade, regulated transfer of technology, and not free trade, because free trade and free capital flows do not, in my opinion, lead to catching up or to sufficient catching up. That would be my arguments.
Okay, so thank you for your comments, and I think that that looking at income shares rather than at Gini coefficients would be my answer to both of you. So, Barbara, you said that a reduction in poverty changes consumption patterns, and this is not per se, this has nothing to do with inequality. But it's also not totally unrelated either. So this conflation is problematic. I do think that, and I said that simply equating inequality reduction with proper growth and allocating and thinking that this is something that takes place at the bottom of the distribution, while income inequality increases or wealth take place at the top, this is a problem. Looking at shares, at income shares, somehow helps to link the two and to get an understanding of what do people earn along the distribution, and then you can ask what they do with it, what they consume, and what they do economically otherwise. So I do think that this is an improvement to address this point a little bit, because it is, poverty reduction is not exclusively, but also a distribution issue. And I fully understand so reservations that you could have with this very bird's eye perspective. On the other hand, this is research that is being done and from which policy conclusions are being drawn. And then again, I think to take a more nuanced perspective could be helpful, because then you can ask questions such as, what does a reduction in inequality actually mean in this case, in this context? I did have a slide that I dropped for time reasons, and that was a slide talking about an absolutely different perspective, a local case study that a colleague did in Colombia. So there was an income increase, cash transfer, inequality was reduced, and the paper was about what do people actually do, what do they consume, and they bought more energy-intensive goods, but they also stopped doing some other like tree cutting activities. So it was, you know, a very particular perspective, but bringing those two together, I think, would be helpful. And then looking a bit more along the distribution, what people have in terms of income and wealth and what they do with it would be middle ground, probably.
Yes. Neither do I. But it might be the only thing that he will succeed in having implemented in common resources. Resources are always scarce when we have to spend in social policies, but might not be scarce when we need to defend. So I do agree with you that the part of defense is not acceptable. But there are things in that report which are against the tradition that has been always said. And I might become a conservative, perhaps, or old. We also need to say this, the things that some other people are saying. When he says that we must be careful to regions that are lagging behind. He's not saying anything new, but at least he's pointing to a problem of the European Union. When he says that we need a common fund, common financing, even perhaps financed by debt, European Investment Bank and so on. It's not saying things that are agreeable to the Nordic countries, so they won't be done. I don't know, but I'm not agreeing with you in throwing the whole report away, and also not picking up some of the ideas that are perhaps have been said since long time from the left, but I might be wrong.
Okay, next round of questions, remarks, comments. I have one person in the back, another person on the other side in the back. So yeah, the two at best.
Go first. Is this on? Okay. Maybe I'll just stand up.
And just a short thing. The more precise and the shorter the questions, the more we can collect and being answered.
Okay. That might be difficult, but I'll try. My name is Emily. I'm currently doing a traineeship at the ECB. My question is for Professor Simonazzi. I need some further convincing about the general narrative of the Draghi report, and just in general this idea, why is it bad in the first place that Europe is lacking behind the US or China in these specific industries? I mean, the EU has very different values, I would say, from the US or China. We value environmental protection, social protection, maybe a bit more than like crazy economic growth. I mean, we saw in previous lecture that people are happy here. So just from a global development perspective, aren't there more poor people in China that would benefit from Chinese growth in comparison to poor people in Europe that would benefit from marginal European growth? So just more convincing on that side. Thank you.
Directly behind was someone else? Or close to it? Yeah.
My name is Sadiq. I'm from India. My question is on globalization and convergence. And the question is, if we are to check in terms of globalization, we realize globalization in relation to poverty, according to what the professor said, is that in terms of globalization and poverty, in the case of India, we realize India has not been able to converge with developed economies. However, when we check in the area of energy poverty and health poverty, we realize India has been able to make remarkable achievements. So in that regard, should we still work on the path of deglobalization?
Okay, thank you. We switch to the right. There's one in the, yes.
Christoph Scharrer. I have also a question to Anamaria Simonazzi. I think you are completely right in criticizing German industry, but I would like to know from Italy, as you come from Italy, and Italy had good preconditions for renewable energy, sun and tool-making industry in northern Italy. And it has a strong auto industry, at least it had. So please tell us a little bit more about it, and also the policies now of the right-wing government and how that would fit in a broader scale of industrial policy within Europe.
There's a, yes, thanks.
Quick question for Professor Herr. You mentioned and emphasized multinationals. Increasingly, there are multinationals in emerging economies, such as Tata in India or CP in Thailand. Is that changing the dynamics at all?
We had more people raising their hands. Oh, there, sorry.
Thank you. My name is Alex Rock, graduate student from Chemnitz, and I have one question for Professor Herr. You said, if I understood you correctly, that deglobalization or like more regional trade is kind of unrealistic, and I would like to hear your like best argument for this position. Like, what is the main reason for that? Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Somewhere there, Jan?
One addition to Hansjörg Herr, Jan Prive, Berlin. One addition to Hansjörg Herr and a question to Anamaria. Hansjörg, if you look at income per capita, then you will find your proposition that there is no catching up of the global south is much stronger than in the figures you showed us. Because, as everybody knows, population growth is strong and has been strong in the global south so far. So make the same pictures with per capita income, and you will see it is much worse in not all, but in many countries. And secondly, one should be aware that a high-income country is defined by the World Bank in this classification as a country that has roughly or almost 14,000 US dollars, which is not so much. So if you are at 14,000, you're a developed country, according to this classification. So that again underlines your proposition that catching up is very, very critical by evidence. And regarding Anamaria, I think the problem with little common industrial policy or insufficient industrial policy in the EU has to do mainly with the point you amazingly did not mention. It seems to me that looking globally at our planet, that the US and China apply very strongly industrial policy, recently in the US under Bidenomics, but quite successfully, especially in China. And EU does not. However, the EU industrial policy in quotation marks is focused on increasing CO2 prices. So that is a sort of pigou tax, which if it really rises by, say, 100% or more than 100%, up to 200 euro per ton, it will be very costly, and neither the US nor China follow this direction. This creates many problems and is probably not very effective in Europe. So would you agree that this is one of the reasons of weak, besides the institutional problems of having a common industrial policy in the EU, which I think is very, very ambitious to expect that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think so far we have collected the questions. I just would like to add one more to you. Jans? Yes. Oh, Jan's question was basically on, is it not a problem that the EU has a different way, in contrast to US and China, by just mainly putting a price on CO2 emissions, a price on CO2 emissions, while US and China rather do industrial policy? Would you agree that this general difference in approaches is a problem? And I would like to add, given that we've seen already a problem in coordination in the EU in the past, seeing that you identify so many asymmetries, and even between Germany and France, of how they are being affected by the current problems, is it really then very realistic to think that we manage to have an integrated policy? Is it realistic to hope for an integrated policy to fight, given that the differences, how countries are affected, differ that much and even stronger than before? Okay. I would suggest that we now do reverse order, so that's not for changing a little bit.
I'm sorry, but the acoustic is not very good when on this side. The first question was, if I understood well, what is bad if Europe is lagging behind in technology and in digital or clean industries. Is it correct? Yeah, okay. Well, let's take, in an ideal world, if you are not competitive in one thing, you will move to another thing. But when you are competing with China, with a country which is so huge and so with an industrial policy so targeted and so quick in moving around, it becomes a problem for your own industry. And let's take again the competition with the United States. If you are lagging behind digital technologies, well, digital technologies enter into any kind of sector, in the automotive, in chemistry, in consumer goods, both in producing and in consuming the products. So there is a problem of defending your own employment and your own industry when the inequalities are so large. We are perhaps returning to the problem of development with the different levels of technology advancement, knowledge. I think that well, if we lose the automotive industry and the Chinese industry has 30% apparently advantage in cost, this is going to be a problem for the European labor as well, for the industries and employment. There might be a problem of export-led growth. I mean, China is moving now towards the exploitation or the production for the domestic market. But, I mean, it is such a targeted, think of the solar panels that the industry, the European industry has been completely destroyed. I think that there might be a reason for defending our own industry, perhaps with investment, perhaps thinking more to a different kind of mobility, thinking of investment in-house, thinking more in terms of long-term strategies, thinking more in terms of industrial policy, which is lacking in Europe. And if Europe is defending its own employment and is focusing more on the domestic market and increases demand, then it might be more easy for other countries to trade and to develop. I mean, I'm not... the policy of China is a bit too much aggressive also, more and more for third world countries. I mean, there might be a balance in the world, but I don't know. Italy, yeah. I'm very good in preaching on Germany, but I'm not exonerating the Italian government. It has been done many mistakes. There has not been a proper industrial policy, and there has been expenditure in wrong places. What I would like to say, nonetheless, is that it is incorrect to analyze the results of a country or to judge or to assess the performance of a country in isolation. Italy, for all the mistakes that have been done, for all the regressive policies that have been done, has also suffered from an interaction with other countries. Italy was not as developed as Germany, and it has been in a disadvantage in competing without trade barriers with free movement of capital, with an industry which was stronger. And as I said, for instance, for the competition with China, well, many of the problems, not all, but many of the problems of Italy in the first decade or 15 years until the crisis and then after have to do with the opening of trade to China. And we cannot explain the success of Germany and the success of Italy if we don't take triangular analysis. China was exporting into the European Union, was exporting products that were in competition with the production of Italy into the European market, into the German market. Germany, thanks also to these cheap imports of consumer goods, could make a policy, a wage policy and a price policy, which once again made a deflationary stress on all the European Union and on Italy. So some of the misfortunes of Italy are the consequence of the interdependence of these different countries. This without excusing the Italian government and the Italian policies. Price on carbon, yes, this could be done. Could be also a way in which the governments could make some money from taxation of price. This I don't think that this is the only policy that we should do. We should also try to accelerate the investment in clean energies. We perhaps should also protect our industries in the transition without letting them go and use the protection for sleeping on and taking profits. I think that we, as I said in the conclusion, we need a complementarity of policies. The industrial policy is a policy of carbon pricing, is a policy of macroeconomic management, and is also a social policy. And we should look also at the effects of the energy prices on the cohesion and income distribution. These differences are too much for a common policy. Well, we have had these differences for 40, 50 years, and there have been winners and losers. Now things are more difficult. German-French partnership has gone up and down in all these years. The problem is if we could understand that I don't think there is an alternative in these conditions. And Europe, I'm afraid, is falling behind. When I look at the European Union, I must say I'm really so worried. Thank you.
Yeah, also thank you for the question. I hope I understood them correctly. First, poverty and globalization. First, poverty, of course, has many, many dimensions, and not only income, that's clear. And maybe to stress again, even without China, poverty over the last decades could be reduced. But at the same time, and I follow Jan Brieve, the absolute increases in the global north of income were much, much higher than the absolute increases in emerging and low income countries. But maybe to stress again, when we look at the last decades, we find in a certain number of countries in the global south, not only China, industrialization. So that's had positive effects. But we should also keep in mind that GDP per capita in the United States and Europe also increased. And it increased much faster in absolute terms than in most countries in the global south. But so we have the lifting of both, but let's say in the global north, increases were much, much higher. Okay, maybe did not completely answer your questions, but sorry for that. Yeah. With the multinational companies, I think that's an important point. I think it's at least for bigger countries, it's of key importance to have own big companies, own in the ideal case, own multinational companies. We analyzed global value chains in car production with colleagues in Brazil and India. In Brazil, 100% of the car industry is owned by foreigners. There's no functional upgrading, profits are taken out, not very nice situation. In India, we have Tata, for example, some multinationals, and they try functional upgrading. They try to become as good as the international competitors, and this makes a huge difference. So I think that's very, very important. The last point, deglobalization, is it realistic or not? In my opinion, we will face the next decades very, very intensive crisis, ecological crisis especially, but probably also other crises. And we will find very radical policies. And I think deglobalization may not be so unrealistic when we have a perspective of 10, 15 years. So quick changes can happen if crises become big. So we should be prepared to react to this big crisis.
Okay. I'm afraid there might be more questions, but I would ask you to then keep them for dinner and for the next meetings and start discussing it with maybe the presenters, but also with other participants. I would first like to thank all the presenters for the presentation. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for giving the presentation. Second, very importantly, how to have dinner. Well, you have two options, basically. You can go from my point of view, it's to the left, to the restaurant, where you will find self-service, or like you will find the dinner and you can sit there. If you rather prefer to be standing to then have it easier to chat to many people, you can also go to the right, because the same food will be also served on the right-hand side, but then rather with small tables where you can stand. So enjoy dinner, make sure to intensify the discussion. Thanks for being here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.